They convicted Randall Dale Adams of capital murder in 1977. He'd shot a Dallas police officer during a traffic stop. The jury decided, and they sent him to death row. Then a filmmaker chasing a documentary about a psychiatrist found something nobody in that courtroom ever heard, a cassette tape. On it, the state's own key witness, the 16-year-old they'd built the entire case around, comes close to confessing to the murder himself. So why did the man who actually fingered Adams to police end up sounding on tape like the shooter? Here's what the jury was told. On November 28, 1976, Officer Robert Wood pulled over a car on a dark stretch of road. He was shot 5 times and died. Days later, police picked up 2 names, Randall Adams, a drifter passing through Dallas, and David Harris, a local teenager who'd been riding with him that night. Harris told police Adams did it. Adams said Harris was driving, Harris had a gun, and Harris dropped him off before circling back alone. The state believed the teenager. Adams, older, an easier fit for the death penalty since Texas couldn't execute a juvenile, got the trial, the conviction, and eventually a death sentence commuted to life. The first crack came from filmmaker Errol Morris, who spent 3 years working the case for what he thought was a different film entirely. Tracked down surviving witnesses and found the physical evidence didn't sit still under pressure. 2 eyewitnesses who'd identified Adams at trial had been coached and rewarded. One wanted reward money, another had a pending charge quietly resolved. Then Morris got Harris himself on tape in 1988 for what was supposed to be a routine interview. On that recording, Harris talks about Adams's guilt in the third person, hedging until Morris asks directly whether Adams is innocent. Harris pauses, then says only Adams's lawyer would know that. It is on tape the closest thing to a confession the case would ever produce. That recording collided head-on with the trial record. At trial, Harris testified with total certainty. Adams pulled the trigger. He watched it happen, no doubt. That certainty was the entire prosecution. There was no murder weapon tied to Adams, no fingerprints, no confession from Adams himself. Take Harris's testimony away, and the case was 3 eyewitnesses picking a stranger's face out of a lineup, months after a fatal shooting in the dark. The tape didn't just cast doubt. It suggested the person who built the state's certainty didn't have any of his own. So why did this never surface at trial? Because Harris was never meaningfully cross-examined about what prosecutors already had on him. He had a documented history of violence, including armed robbery, and a pattern investigators later confirmed, but the jury never learned in full. His juvenile file, the record that would have shown a habit of arming himself and lying to police, stayed effectively out of reach, protected by the same juvenile confidentiality rules meant to give young offenders a second chance. Adams's own defense team didn't have the resources or the access Morris eventually assembled with a camera crew and years to spare. The system wasn't hiding a locked room. It was relying on a file nobody was required to open. Deeper reveal is what made coincidence impossible. Harris wasn't just a witness with a record. In 1985, 9 years after Officer Wood's murder, he broke into a home in Beaumont, Texas, kidnapped a woman, and shot a man named Mark Mays dead when he tried to stop him. That crime looked almost identical in its recklessness to the one Adams had been convicted of, a young man with a gun, willing to shoot without hesitation. Prosecutors in that second case sent Harris to death row, which meant by 1988, the state of Texas was holding one man on death row for a murder, and holding the man who'd sent him there on death row for a nearly identical one. 2 death sentences from the same gun-happy teenager, 9 years apart, and only one of them had actually been convicted of shooting Officer Wood. The implications moved fast once the tape became public. In March 1989, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned Adams's conviction, citing the suppressed record and the unreliable witnesses Morris had exposed. Dallas prosecutors declined to retry him, and he walked free after 12 years, most of them expecting execution. David Harris was executed in 2004, not for Robert Wood's murder, but for Mark Mays's. He was never charged in the case his own testimony had decided. No court ever formally ruled on what Harris said on that tape. He's dead. The file that could confirm it stays exactly as ambiguous as the recording, a man circling the truth, never quite stepping into it. So the question the verdict left behind is still open. If the state's own witness came that close to admitting it, why did it take a documentary crew and not a courtroom to ask him the question that mattered?